Hi, everybody. Well, welcome to our next session. Today has a lot of slides, but largely because I just wanted to do as much as I could within our tech format to at least present images of nature since we aren't actually experiencing them together. So today we're going to be talking about ecotherapy, and I'm hopeful that the reading in the chapter as well as the time here in our session will encourage you to keep considering and hopefully participating in just exploring God's beauty and God's creation in the ways that are most appropriate for your circumstance and for your preferences. I know sometimes the weather and sometimes the season discourages us from being out at times. This is an image I took. It would have been Thanksgiving break of 2021, I believe. So near our house in Gresham is this overlook called John's Rood Point that looks out to Mount Hood. And this was an early morning sunrise image of that. So even though it may be towards the time of the year where weather isn't always the most inviting, I think that you can still find times and spaces to be able to be out. Then again, whatever way works best for you. The topic of the chapter is ecotherapy. So that's just trying to describe a method of trying to just de-stress and trying to return your mind and your body back to a state of health. It expects of you, though, or proper practice is going to be that you are repeatedly and routinely looking to expose yourself or just be centered and attentive to God's creation. It's kind of amazing to me when we look at statistics around how we choose to spend our time right now. There's a lot of variation in these as there isn't much clear data on large scale individuals. But there are a number of estimates that really that do suggest that people spend less than 5% of their time outdoors. And I think you can maybe imagine that right now, especially if the weather is not encouraging you to be outdoors. One of the conditions that we're seeing everyone, but in particular kids more frequently described with is nature deficit disorder. And this is just a description of someone who's really disconnected from God's creation. And largely that seems driven by our deep interests in technology. Social media is a topic that we have dealt with before, but it is not limited to a fascination with social media and being connected through those spaces. Technology drives us into numerous forms of technological distraction. Another way of describing the impact of the technology distraction on the attention and activities of kids is we have pretty clear statistics that both in the US and in England showing that kids actually spend less time outside than prison inmates do. And that just seems very bad. I'm not, it just seems bad. I like this quote from John Burroughs. He says, I go to nature to be soothed and healed and to have my senses put back in order. Now that is a good paraphrase of the way that I feel as ecotherapy or getting out into nature is something that I personally appreciate deeply and something that I choose to use as one of my primary stress management techniques. So if we look a little bit at a historical perspective of ecotherapy, there's a few interesting pieces that I would like to pull out. First, we can look way back in our written history to recognize or to see that the power of nature has long been recognized and emphasized. So, all the way back to Plato, we see writings emphasizing the healing quality of nature. Frederick Olmsted is a name you may or may not know. He is responsible for the creation of Central Park in New York City. And he said that that was an important and critical aspect of city planning because it was necessary to erase the ills of modern civilization on its people, according to Mr. Olmsted. I think you might find it a little bit interesting that the introduction of the word vacation, we've talked about vacation days here recently and work burnout. The word vacation was introduced in the 1869 into the American lexicon. Um, as you see in the slide, the British, and we talked about the British use the word holiday as the equivalent of vacation for us. This addition of the word vacation to our vocabulary came after the Civil War. And it happened because there was this really popular book that encouraged New Yorkers and other city dwellers to leave their homes and to head out. And in the language of the book that we're referencing, the author kept saying, we need to vacate. You need to vacate your urban settings. And that is where the term vacation originated from. Ecotherapy, which has a number of other names, and you can see them listed there on the slide as well as in your reading, began in California in the early 1990s as therapists saw a real benefit of taking their clients out and leaving the couch and instead gathering outside, that it just changed the relationship and the communication and the openness of their patients. So that's the roots of this particular uh, methodology. I think it's fun to see some movies like the Avatar series having this clear message of ecotherapy, and there's numerous others I think that we have witnessed that encourage people just to be outside, to get outside, and that it changes how you interact. Here is Frederick Olmsted's um, Central Park. You can see there New York City and uh, the surrounding areas with the incredible population density and the incredible amount of human linear structures that are there. So his attesting that it was necessary to have green spaces and to have an area where people could gather and recreate and even just relax that wasn't stuck in an urban space. Again, he said it was necessary to erase the ills of modern civilization on its people. And maybe you can see some rationale for that when you see an aerial view of what New York City has grown into. But that idea of being alone is an important one for many individuals. They find it very powerful. So if you have been drawn towards meditation or if you've been drawn to any of the practices that encourage introspection, then that idea of being alone may be something, maybe a central part of how you de-stress. Being alone in nature, I think, gives me a chance to feel a sense of scale. Like, as I look out at a setting like the one you see there, it would make me think of where my place is and where the level of significance of whatever challenges or stressors or pressures I'm facing are. It'll also give me a sense of time and allow me again to remember that my belief structure says that my trials and pains and difficulties are temporary. So, however you approach those spaces, this is a practice that I find a deep appreciation for. So that's why I'm very hopeful that I can convince you to consider, or if you're already somebody who enjoys it, that you'll continue to invest into it. Biophilia is when we have an emotional affiliation to other just living things that we just feel connected to. I like to say it is God's creation, although that can certainly include non-living things as well. Um, but there's something powerful even about this simple scene of the individual. This is a scene from Gladiator where the character is just walking through a wheat field. And this is a recreation of that kind of idea. This isn't the actual film Gladiator, but I think there's something that just feels kind of beautiful and empowering about scenes like that, being connected to the earth, to God's creation. So if you have ever felt that, maybe you feel a deep connection to animals or your pets, or maybe it is even broader in nature and just even images or videos like this make you feel a deeper sense of connection. I think that's a powerful voice for us to be listening to. That's such a powerful voice that there's a few practices that have begun to emerge over the last couple of decades. You may have heard of forest bathing or Shinrun Yoko, which is a Japanese tradition of just attempting to completely absorb the atmosphere of the forest, that you just totally immerse yourself and your senses into what's going on within the forest. Now, you don't bring anything with you as far as distractions, whether they be electronic or emotional or tasks, but instead that you just find a space and you do as much as you can to be present in that space, to bathe in the forest, essentially. Now, of course, this doesn't have to be a forest. You could go to simply a park or a beach or wherever is a setting that's both accessible and enjoyable for you. But it's a method of trying to just relax in the outdoors. And if it's something that you choose to attempt or participate in, it mirrors very closely one of your labs that comes due at the end of the semester. The suggestions are to do everything you can to disconnect from the pressures and the stresses that you bring with you. So if you're bringing your phone with you, turn it off. Don't just silence it, but turn it off. You may want to keep it with you, especially if you're going deeper into areas that you're unfamiliar with, so that if there is some kind of emergency, you can get back, but or that you have access to help. But that represents a clear tether to a lot of your tasks and a lot of the individuals that may be asking for your attention. So if you can spend 20 minutes of just being as disconnected from the pressures in your life as possible and instead connected to the life that's all around you within nature that God created, that can have a powerful impact. Now, while 20 minutes is oftentimes what's recommended for beginners, it certainly isn't a absolute requirement. Any time that you is going to be better than none. So I encourage you to continue to find spaces, continue to explore around you to find the places where you could just go, even if it's just for between classes, that there's a bench down by the creek or there's a space that you just feel helps you be disconnected a bit, but connected to nature. This is becoming more recognized within our own medical system. So we are seeing a movement called Park RX or Park prescriptions. It's much more common in pediatrics, which makes sense when you saw some of the data around how little time kids spend outdoors. But Park RX or Park prescriptions are just physicians actually telling their patients, telling their kids, you need to go outside. You need to go to a park and you need to just be outside to hopefully encourage both activity and connection and de-stressing and deconnecting in ways that maybe they didn't do on their own. This is a hike that I did 2 summers ago. Um, there's a pretty dynamic waterfall at the head, well, not at the head, but further up this creek. But I think sometimes just finding space to just sit down and watch and listen and be engaged is powerful. At least it's very powerful for me. So, are there actually any benefits besides a mental release from stress that this kind of forest bathing or this ecotherapy might bring about? Well, it's becoming obviously there's more and more research growing in this area. We are seeing that there are indeed physiological benefits, not just emotional, social, and mental benefits. So, in one of the very first, and what is often identified as an initiator or recognizing the value of just this sense of ecotherapy, this sense of that just being connected, even in small ways to nature, can be really helpful. Um, in one study, they had hospital patients, and in one group, they put hospital patients who were recovering from the same surgery. Um, some of them were put into hospital rooms where the view out the window was of nature, whether it was just of trees or whether they could see further to a mountain or whatever, that they could just see nature in any form. Then the other group of individuals who were recovering from the same surgeries were put into rooms where they still had a window, so they're still getting natural light, but all they can see is the brick of the side of another building. So they're not getting any sense or view of nature. And in that study, they found that individuals who could see nature actually recovered more quickly. So it was a first scientifically based study um, that where you have clear results, and there was a large N, and there was enough. You had the control group that was only seeing bricks, so it was a well done study that helped to establish the value of these kinds of things. As researchers continued along, and as you'll see in your reading in the chapter, what they're finding more of the things that they're finding that validate the importance of ecotherapy is that even just images of nature tend to promote and increase our alpha waves in the brain. We definitely see people reporting a decrease in feelings of anger or tension, which is something we looked at much earlier in the semester. And this doesn't have to be grand. This doesn't have to be that you are deeply immersed miles into a forest and it's completely removed from civilization. Benefits are even seen by individuals who have just potted plants. Uh, so even just small representations of nature help us in some way, somehow to feel a little bit more connected. And I like to articulate that as it were just a little more connected to God's creation instead of being disconnected and trying to identify only with man's creation. We also see the dopamine levels are changed when individuals are seeing images that they find um, pleasing from a nature setting. We find that if you go for a walk, that it's going to improve your sleep and that it's going to decrease your cortisol levels. We see that your immune system has a pretty significant impact, a positive impact when you're out in nature. So we'll see the number of killer T cells improve. We'll see that even with just aromatic scents, that it's going to boost the immune system and that natural sunlight also does that. So in multiple ways, just being outside and being present and really paying attention to your senses helps you. Beyond that, you may also just feel a deeper connection to God or to your creator when you're out in natural settings. I've never been in a position like this picture from the textbook talks about swimming alongside a baby humpback whale. I've never been in that kind of a situation, although the image itself and some of the videos that I've seen that represent similar circumstances certainly make it feel like it would be a bit of a, not a bit, make it feel like it would be a spiritual experience. But I think that for me, that is accessible even in settings that I'm more familiar with. And I think for me, another part of that oftentimes is just spending some time or some of that experience, even if I'm going hiking or if I'm going outside with multiple other friends, that I just find some ways to be able to break away from others and just be able to experience nature and immerse myself individually. I remain hopeful and prayerful that at some point in my life, I am going to take the chance to be able to go experience the Northern Lights. That is another thing that for me, I haven't experienced, but does look like something that just would make me feel connected spiritually through natural, through the natural environment. So for yourself, I don't imagine that the image on the left is probably representative of the way that you want to spend your time outside at the moment. But sunshine, warmth, and nice seasons will be coming. So I hope that you do consider both that you can be outside now, just because it rains frequently or it's cooler, doesn't mean that there aren't good times to be able to get outside. And it may be that there's a lot of beauty and a lot of peacefulness in that rain and in that space. You're more likely to be experiencing opportunities for solitude. So, whether it's sunrises or sunsets, which attract me and I enjoy the photography of that, or whether it's being outside in just green spaces, that again for me is something that's really helpful. If you are choosing to get out in nature, and I certainly hope that you do, I do recommend that you bring your phone, but I would suggest that you turn it off. Don't use it to document every moment of your experience because it's also going to be tethering you back to your responsibilities and your pressures. So there's an idea of nature points, and that idea or gamification of getting outside says, yeah, you absolutely gain points um, towards being happier when you're out in nature. But if you're continued to be plugged in, then you don't earn any points. So again, I'm hopeful that this is something that you'll consider. I think nature has a real way of putting our problems into perspective and having us recognize the bigger picture of life and our space in there. I hope that you do choose to start thinking outside the box, or at least just outside. There's no necessarily box required. And as we enter towards the end of the semester and vacation, or at least time away from class spaces, vacation's probably the wrong word to use there. But I hope that you're making sure that you are filling your own cup. And for many of us at the moment, I think that's going to require rest, that you've been pushing yourself and you've been taxing yourself and you've felt pressures for quite a while and you've added pressures to yourself for quite a while. But as you get rest, I hope you'll continue to move up and continue to fill up your cup with multiple stages and steps around stress management and just not even just, I think maybe I would prefer to say it other than stress management, just that it's fulfillment, that you feel empowered, that you feel purposeful, and that you feel fulfilled and content. So, I don't know how many of these steps you will choose to engage in, but I certainly hope that whatever you've found across this semester that helps you, you take that with you beyond this semester and that you know the steps and stages that work for you to be able to help you in times of challenge and in times of stress. So, thank you for being here. I appreciate it, and we will see each other soon.